Hello everyone, my name is Ronnie Quint. I'm a solutions architect at F5. Today we're going to show how to set up the automation tools required to automate the F5 distributed cloud. Before we get started, we need a bash terminal with curl and gzip installed. We need Terraform downloaded. We'll need to know our F5 distributed cloud tenant. We'll get to that shortly. And we'll need to download and configure our DevCentral CLI. The tools required to automate are outlined in this URL. You'll see here, you can click through and there's very detailed documentation for each. We recommend using the API or the Terraform. The reason that we have a command line utility is that certain functions are only available to do locally, such as encrypting secrets. So when we encrypt secrets, we use our CLI. Otherwise, we use our REST API or Terraform. Now I'm going to show you how to generate the credentials required for each tool. Either we generate an API certificate that's used for our CLI or for Terraform, or we need an API token that's used for our REST API. So if we click on the credentials link, it will take us here. And if we just scroll down, I'm going to run through the instructions outlined under Generate API Certificate and Generate API tokens. So let's go to our console. Once we've logged in, this is the home page of the Distributed Cloud Console. In order to generate tokens, we click on our user icon, click on Account Settings, click on Credentials. Now let's click on Add Credential. So first, let's put a name for our API certificate. We need to set a password. And let's set the expiry date. You can set it for tomorrow. And let's download that. Similarly, let's click on Add Credentials for API Cert. Give it a name. The API token. And let's set an expiry date for tomorrow. This will be the only time that we can see the token, so copy it and put it in a safe place. Once you've done that, just click on Done. Okay, now we have our token and we have our cert. So the next step, we need to find our tenant from the console. And this will allow us to configure our API tools and tell each tool the endpoint of our distributed cloud. So in order to do that, to find the tenant, let's log in to our distributed cloud console. We click on All Services, which is here. Click on Cloud and Edge Sites. And you'll notice there's this ves.io allow Volterra. Let's expand that. And notice we have our tenant outlined here. So just copy that, and we'll need that soon. So I've just made a note of that here. This is the tenant that we're using today. And for the URL, just notice we're taking the first part of that tenant, and this becomes our endpoint for our API. So we're going to need these in all the sections below to configure each tool. Okay, so the next step, let's download and configure our command line utility. All the instructions can be found here. I'll just run through them quickly. So first, I'm using a Mac. Let's download the CLI package. Next, we're going to unzip it. And we'll add execute permissions. And we'll just copy it to our bin folder so that we'll have access to it. And let's just type vesctl. And here we go. This command line utility works very similar to the kube control. So to create, we can use manifests, and we can pass any verb, vestcontrol create, list, and all the documentation will be found on the command line itself. So great, we've configured our vest CLI, or we've downloaded it, sorry. Now let's configure. So in order to configure that, we have to set the password for our certificate. So let's just set an environment variable with the password. The read -s, the -s is to hide the input from the terminal, just to keep it safe. And let's export that value to make it an environment variable. Next thing that we'll need to do is create a .vestconfig file, which has the location of our certificate, and we've also specified what the endpoint of the URL is in server URL. So let's just do that quickly. And so this is the default location of our config file. There is a command line argument to specify if you'd like to keep this in a different location, but for now we'll just stick to the default location. Okay, great. So our Vest CLI is configured. Let's move on and configure Terraform. So for Terraform, what we'll need is we need to set our provider. F5 has a provider at this address. And we'll need to pass the provider the information very similar to the vestcontrol CLI. We need to specify the location of our certificate and the URL. So I'm going to get to this shortly when we run the tests for each command line utility, or each automation tool, and you'll see that this is configured in our Terraform file. The next thing we need to do is configure our API token. So let's go back to our terminal. And copy the API token that was generated earlier, paste it in, and let's export this to make it an environment variable. Okay, great. Now that we have all of that, we can proceed to test and make sure that we can connect to the F5 distributed cloud. So I'm going to run just a sample command using the CLI, and this will just list all of the namespaces. Just for privacy, so I don't print out other users' information, I'm just going to grep it and just print out my namespace. So let's go back to our terminal. Let's run this command. And we should see my namespace. So that means that we've installed the CLI, we've configured the CLI, and we've pointed it to the correct endpoint of F5 distributed cloud. Do the same thing for Terraform. So for Terraform, we're going to use also the namespace resource, and we're just going to run a plan. We're not going to change anything now, but if we run a plan, it will just confirm that we're connected to Terraform. So let's go to the browser, to F5 distributed cloud. So if we go to the browser, see, here's the Terraform file. Here's the provider, here's our configuration information, and here's our namespace. So let's Terraform init. Great, and now we'll do Terraform plan. Great, so this means that we've connected to the F5 distributed cloud, and if we were to run the apply, it would create this resource. This test is just to show our connection, so we've connected using Terraform. Let's proceed now to test the API. So again, we're just going to list out the namespaces, And just to hide any information, we're just going to print out the first 5 lines of the output. In future videos, we're going to show how to build API requests, but in this video, we're just going to use this API command just to verify our connection. So let's go back to the terminal. Let's paste that into the terminal. And great, we've printed out the first few lines of our JSON output, which validates that we've connected to F5 Distributed Cloud Console. Thanks for watching.